Alright, covered in this section, we're going to revisit the window model. Again, we're going to do UV unwrapping of all the objects in the environment, and we're going to make a few changes to the layers. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take that window. I just made a link duplicate just so I can pull it away from the wall and straighten it out so that I can fix these. And I'm erasing all the faces that I created in the corners, and I'm going to connect those vertices again manually. I'm just basically undoing all the work I did last time when I was a little bit fixated on adding a bit of extra detail. So I've done that, and now we're going to start UV unwrapping. We're going to start with a single truss, and since they're all connected, because they're link duplicates, we only have to unwrap one. I'm going to get rid of the toolbar on the side there. I'm going to give myself lots of space in the image window and the 3D window. You go into edit mode and you see the UVs on the right. You might have to add UVs by just pressing the U key and selecting anything. In the mesh options in the properties window, I'm going to change the UV texture layer to color instead of UV text. That's important. We're going to do that for every single object. It's basically for the sake of organization later on when we're adding textures and multiple UV layers for shadow maps. But we're going to change the UV layer name to color for every single object. And here I'm adding a few seams by pressing Ctrl and E for the seam menu on a couple of the edges. And to get into edge select mode, in the top 3D view header, you can see a couple of icons that have cubes on them. And this is your different selection modes. The one on the left is vertex selection, the one in the middle is edge selection, and the one on the right is face selection. So I added a few seams, and I'm unwrapping this now as if I was to unwrap a box. However, I changed my mind about this and end up unwrapping all of the faces individually in a minute, because this just takes up too much space with all those faces connected. Whereas if I unwrap them individually, I can overlap them, and I can use the same texture strip, which means I can add more samples of wood textures on a single texture map, and you'll see what I mean later. So now I'm selecting all of the edges. I press Ctrl and E and selected Mark Seam. And then I press U and selected Unwrap. And that gives me all these individual faces, which now I'm just going to go through real quick and clean up. Although they appear connected, they're actually individual pieces. And you can press the L key with the mouse cursor over some of the UVs, and it will select that object. And it looks like one of the faces was connected to another face. So I'm just going to go and select that individual face and move it away from the other UVs. That way I can disconnect it. So now you can see what I'm doing. I'm overlapping things here. That way I can have just one strip of wood texture for this one little area. And it would save space on the texture map and allow me to add multiple texture samples for wood. And now I'm duplicating that to the other side because I'm lazy and I don't feel like unwrapping that other plank. And I'm going to delete that plank that's underneath it. And I just hid those pressing the H key. For every face that I unwrap, or for every mesh object I unwrap within this object, I'm going to hide it so that it's not obstructing my view, and so that I remember that I already unwrapped it. So I just selected all those faces, and again I pressed Control and E to add seams to every edge, and then I unwrap them all. And now I'm just going through, I'm fixing it up. And I'm going to do this for every plank object that I have to, which actually isn't that many since most of our plank objects are linked duplicates. Now, you might notice I'm not straightening the top and bottom edges of those UVs. That's because that's actually what they look like in the scene. They're actually slanted at the top and bottom like that. Since we're using wood textures, it honestly wouldn't matter anyway if I straighten them out or if anything was distorted. Wood texture is so chaotic and there's a lot going on that you're not going to notice a little distortion like that. It's just going to look like the natural lines of the wood. Now I'm selecting all of the smaller edges because when you use the unwrap option, it doesn't always take into account proportions, so it made them wider than they should be. And make sure to unhide those planks that you've already hidden and shrink down those small edges. When you're unwrapping multiple groups of planks or of anything, and you're placing them on your UV layout, make sure you keep them separate until you're finished unwrapping everything. Then you can decide how you want to fit everything within that texture map, within that texture space. I added a new image and I enabled UV grid, and this allows me to make sure that all my UVs are not stretched. And so I'm going through, I'm selecting them plank by plank and making sure that all of the squares and plus signs on this UV grid appear correctly. And I'm also making sure that they're all proportional to each other. Like these end planks have smaller squares than the other ones, so I'm going to scale those UVs down so that the squares appear to be bigger. And now we've just completed unwrapping all of the trusses. I'm going to hide those objects, and then we're going to go through and we're going to do the same thing for everything else that's left in this layer. And then we're going to go to the next layer. It's a tedious process, but it's easy. Make sure you change that UV texture layer name to color for every object. Again, I'm changing the layer name to color, adding seams, unwrapping, fixing it up, scaling down the small sides, and then just lining things up horizontally. Same process over and over. When I'm scaling the small sides down, I'm basically just eyeing it up. It's not going to be that noticeable because, like I said, we're using a wood texture, so a little bit of distortion is going to be completely fine. So you don't want to fixate too much on making those squares perfectly proportional and perfectly square. Alright, so everything is done in that layer. I'm going to move on to one of the end walls. Or actually, it looks like we're working with the side wall now. Pillars are an easy unwrap. We're just going to add one seam. And then we're just going to unwrap it. You can press the home key and it's going to center that screen for you. I was just confused for a second. So back in edge selection mode, I selected one of the edges on the cylinder, added a seam, selected all the faces, and selected unwrap in the unwrap window, which is the U key. Gives you your unwrap options. Scaling those UVs to make sure all those squares appear properly. Same thing as the planks, basically just unwrap, fix it up, move on. All the pillars are complete. I changed the UV layer name to color again. I forgot until the end that time, but whatever. Now the side pillars were a different mesh because they were a different size. So I unwrapped them separately. They weren't unwrapped with the original middle pillars. So I'm just selecting them and I'm hiding them now. Top and bottom of that 2x4 wasn't capped, so I added faces there. I don't know why it was like that, but luckily everything is linked duplicate. So I just make one change to one object and all the others change with it. Now I'm going to select one of the windows. I'm going to move it to local view and we're going to work with unwrapping this now. To start, I'm going to select each group of vertices in each of the four corners and I'm going to mark a seam there. And then I'm going to make a seam on the inside of this window frame. I'm going to select one of the inside loops of that window frame and mark that as a seam. And then press U and unwrap and you should have four little islands like this. I'm just going to fix these UVs up by realigning them. Again, because we're applying a wooden texture to this window, it won't matter if there's a little bit of distortion. So you can see there's a little distortion. I fix it up a little bit, but otherwise it's not that horrible. So now with these little crossbars, I'm going to add a seam to each of them, adding 2 seams so that we get 2 separate sets of UVs for each crossbar, front and back. And then I unwrap them, and now I'm just fixing them up. If some of the faces aren't displaying the checker pattern, you can simply select those faces, go into the image window, and load in the checker pattern image. So selecting an image in the image window while faces are selected will apply that image to those faces. Sometimes some faces get left out. So there's our window all unwrapped. That middle pane was just one face, so I used either unwrap or reset in the UV options menu. And now I'm adding some loop cuts in it so we can create 6 different panes. To create a loop cut, you can press the Control and L key, and you'll see this purple line showing you where the cut's going to be made. So now we're done with the windows. So I hid them. Now we're going to move on to the sheet metal. In front view, I'm just going to select Project from View. That'll be good enough. But select one of the ones that are oriented straight. Actually, there I go and use Unwrap. I guess I figured that it had to be unwrapped perfectly. There were a few faces on the back end there that I just erased. And now I'm going to go through, I'm going to create a seam around the main edge of the entire window frame. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the inside border of each window cutout. And again on the inside of that. To select a loop of edges automatically, you can hold the Alt key and left click on it. And that will select all of the vertices that form a clean edge from the point you started at. So with all those edges marked as seams, and then went ahead and unwrapped it. And this is the mess that I got, so I'm going to clean this up real quick. I selected those front faces there, and I did a project from view from front view instead of unwrapping them. And I selected that inside set again. I don't know what to call that area. We'll call it a lip. So I selected the inside lip, and I unwrapped that so I could get a cleaner unwrap. And now I'm just overlapping everything horizontally, just like with all the other planks. Because we're going to add a wooden texture to the window as well. I enabled face mode in the UV window so that I could separate those two faces from each other, because they were welded together at one UV. With this group of faces here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to enable face selection mode. Then I'm going to separate all these windows and each individual face on the window. I'm going to make them all horizontal, and then I'm going to overlap them with all the other UVs. I'm going to make sure the squares show up all proportional with each other. Now with the window frames done, moved on to the walls. Actually, we're going to work with the support planks now. The walls we'll do much later since they're really simple to unwrap. Same story as earlier. They're just more planks. Now, instead of facing these different groups of different sized planks on the wall, I'm actually just going to make more link duplicates and replace the ones I had before. You can see the squares are being squished on the end there because the planks are about half the width. But later on we'll fix that when we apply textures to it. Doing the same thing here with the middle support planks. I'm replacing those with planks that I've already unwrapped. When you see me move things up into the air like that, I'm just moving it out of the way so I can delete the planks beneath it. And then I move them back down. I'm going through and I'm making sure everything I unwrapped has a UV layer name of color. Now I'm going through and making sure that all of the squares on each object is proportional to the squares on every other object, because we're essentially going to have the same size texture map for almost everything in the level. It's either going to be either a 512 or a 1024, and so the textures within each of those texture maps are going to be pretty proportional to each other, so we want to make sure that the UV layout on all these objects is proportional as well. Now the planks on this far wall we didn't unwrap yet, so I selected those planks that we did unwrap, and after I centered the cursor on the main beam on the ceiling so that the cursor was center of the environment, I then just link duplicated those planks we unwrapped, and I rotated them around the cursor 180 degrees so that they're on the other wall, and then I deleted any of those planks over there that weren't unwrapped yet. Now these windows on the end walls, they're not unwrapped. So what we're going to do is we're going to select those two cutout windows and select. Actually, I don't know what I just did there. I tried to link the mesh data, thinking I was all fancy, but it didn't work out. So instead, I'm just going to duplicate one of those four cutouts, and I'm going to delete two of them. It was a regular duplication, not a linked one, because I need to edit the mesh. So now I'm going to get rid of half of it. And then we're going to fix up this two-slotted window frame to actually replace the two-slotted window frame we had before. That way it saves us a little bit of time since we won't have to unwrap it. Now I joined those meshes together because all of the two-slotted window frames are linked together. They're linked duplicates. So if I join the new two-slotted window frame with the old one, then all of the others, as you see, become connected to it and unwrapped. It just saves me a little bit of work of having to unwrap each of the two-slotted window frames individually. Now the planks on the end walls, they're not unwrapped. So I'm just link duplicating one of the ones I've already unwrapped and moving it into its place, and then deleting the original. All of these should have been linked better. That was my mistake, but it doesn't take that long to correct. Because in the beginning I thought I would have different sized meshes and that would play a major role in how much the texture was distorted. So I decided to create different meshes for each different width of plank. But then I realized part of the way through that I can change the UVs after I've applied textures to all of the planks, so I might as well just keep all of them linked to each other, no matter what their width is. Now all the objects on the back wall that aren't unwrapped, I'm going to delete them, and by all the objects I just mean the planks, and I'm going to select the planks on the wall that we did unwrap, and in top view I'm going to link duplicate them and rotate them around the cursor, which still should be centered in the very center of the environment. move them onto the other wall by rotating them 180 degrees, and then I'm going to just make a quick pass through it and make sure that everything was aligned properly. I'm just looking through the layers, making sure everything I wanted to unwrap was unwrapped. And now I'm making a few changes to the layers, because some of the planks were now in layers they shouldn't be in. So I'm just moving them to layers they should be in.